In the remote reaches of the Southern Ocean, far from any charted trade route, a fleet of German warships and Hydra submarines plow through storm-tossed waters. Their engines roar against the freezing wind, cutting a path of ruin across the waves. A smaller craft, black and ironbound, cuts between them, a Hydra vessel ferrying its master toward his true prize. Johann Schmidt, the Red Skull, transfers from his command ship to the Leviathan, Hydra's newest deep-sea submarine. Around it, other submarines ready themselves for descent, their hulls gleaming with frost and insignia. The convoy sinks beneath the surface, swallowed by the abyss. Below, the light fades quickly. The Southern Ocean becomes a void, a cathedral of pressure and silence. As the Leviathan dives, shapes move in the gloom. Warriors of the deep, their forms sleek and alien, brandishing weapons forged of coral and metal. They surge toward the intruders, their movements swift and unified, but the Hydra fleet answers with mechanical precision. Torpedoes streak outward. The water ignites with explosions. One by one, the defenders vanish into clouds of debris and blood. The deeper the Leviathan descends, the stranger the sea becomes. Ruins emerge from the darkness. Archways, towers, and spires, etched in bioluminescent glyphs. The remnants of a civilization stretch across the seabed, impossibly vast. And there, hidden beneath centuries of ocean sediment and myth, lies Atlantis. Deep within the royal citadel, word spreads swiftly. Hydra has attacked the sacred homeland, the ancient capital buried beneath Antarctic ice. The news reverberates through the city like a tremor, reaching the heart of the Atlantean Empire, the throne of Thakorr. Within a chamber of marble and light, King Thakorr, aged but formidable, confers with his daughter, Princess Finn. The two stand amid a panoramic view of the kingdom, its beauty, its power, and its secrecy. Their discussion turns to vengeance, to the question of whether Atlantis should strike back at the surface world. Finn urges retaliation, her anger tempered only by sorrow for the fallen. But Thakorr is cautious. He recalls the endless wars of humanity, how nations destroy themselves out of greed and fear, how the surface burns without the aid of any god or king. He warns that to rise now would be to unite them under a single cause, the destruction of Atlantis. The kingdom's peace, its anonymity, has preserved it for centuries. To break that silence could mean extinction. Before their council can conclude, the chamber's great doors quake. The guards stationed outside shout in alarm, their weapons drawn, but the defense crumbles in moments. The doors burst inward, shattered by a force neither magical nor divine, but furious. Through the haze of splintered coral and waterlight strides Prince Namor, the Submariner. The young prince is a vision of wrath contained, his eyes hard as the ocean depths, his presence filling the room with the raw authority of his lineage. He has forced his way through the royal guard and into the war room itself, driven by a singular purpose. Though Finn and Thakorr are disturbed by his defiance, they understand the inevitability of this moment. Namor demands retribution, a full-scale strike against Hydra and the surface dwellers who violated the sanctity of their world. But Thakorr denies him. The old king's restraint, his wisdom born of centuries of caution, clashes with the rising tide of Namor's fury. Namor departs in silence, yet the sea seems to tremble in his wake. His rage is not quelled, it is ignited. When Hydra returns to the Pacific and their submarines draw near to the Atlantean borders, a massive explosion tears through the city. The shockwave rips apart domes, shatters palaces, and consumes the coral avenues in torrents of fire and boiling water. The ancient metropolis reels in chaos. When the water clears, King Thakorr lies among the fallen. The once proud ruler, who guarded Atlantis with caution and patience, is gone. The Atlanteans mourn him beneath their ruined domes, their wails echoing through the drowned halls of the capital. In the aftermath, Princess Finn names Namor as her temporary successor. No one dares challenge him. The burden of the crown becomes a mantle of vengeance, and the prince's wrath hardens into destiny. Across war-torn Europe, the conflict has shifted. Captain America and the Howling Commandos now lead the charge against Hydra's growing war machine, cutting through enemy territory with relentless precision. Town by town, bunker by bunker, they dismantle the organization that has infected the Nazi regime from within. Through scorched forests and shattered cities, Steve Rogers embodies the symbol of defiance. His shield gleams against the gray skies, a beacon for the Allied soldiers who follow him. Enhanced by the serum of Project Rebirth, Steve fights with impossible endurance. His strength and speed driving his men forward through ambushes, trenches, and frozen strongholds. The commandos move like a single organism, guided by Steve's tactical clarity. Each strike is swift and devastating. Hydra outposts crumble under their assaults. Munitions depots ignited from within, communication lines severed, laboratories reduced to twisted metal. Steve often leads these missions personally, infiltrating enemy compounds on his motorcycle, racing through fire and debris as explosions bloom behind him. His every victory lights another spark of hope across the continent. As the months pass and the snows of winter descend, their campaign grinds deeper into enemy territory. In one decisive operation, Steve halts a Nazi blockade that threatened to trap Allied divisions in retreat. Acting alone, he shatters the enemy's line, securing the escape of over 600 soldiers. His legend grows, whispered among the troops as myth and morale alike. Afterward, the mission continues. Hydra's shadow lingers, and the commandos push harder. Bucky Barnes, now serving as their sniper, becomes Steve's watchful counterpart, his rifle ensuring the team's safety as they navigate the ruins of fallen Hydra installations. From rooftops, forests, and bombed-out factories, his marksmanship clears their path forward. Together, they press on, an unyielding force in a collapsing war, turning the tide one destroyed fortress at a time, even as the cost of victory grows heavier with each mission. The World Exposition of Tomorrow has drawn to a triumphant close, its exhibits and inventions heralding a bold new era of science and progress. In the quiet aftermath, two of the Expo's brightest minds, Howard Stark and Phineas Horton, remain behind among the emptied halls, surrounded by the remnants of innovation and spectacle. They stand before one of the fair's most talked-about marvels, Horton's synthetic woman, an artificial being he has named Cynthia Glass. Encased within a transparent chamber of glass and steel, the figure lies motionless, bathed in soft laboratory light. As they talk, Horton recounts the story of her creation, his attempt to merge chemistry, engineering, and biology into something beyond mere machinery. His passion spills into every word, revealing the depth of his ambition. Stark listens intently, his curiosity piqued by both the science and the man's daring. Horton leads Stark closer to the chamber. With a precise touch, he adjusts the controls, a series of dials regulating the sealed environment. A faint hiss escapes as he introduces a measured trace of oxygen into the vacuum. In an instant, the synthetic woman reacts. Her hands and head ignite in brilliant flame, the fire curling harmlessly around her as though alive. The light dances across the walls, illuminating Stark's astonishment. For Horton, this is not a surprise but satisfaction. He studies the reaction with the composure of a man witnessing proof of concept. Then, calmly, he turns the dials back, sealing the chamber once more. The oxygen depletes, the fire fades, and Cynthia Glass returns to stillness. Horton goes on to explain that Cynthia is, in essence, an android, a marvel of mechanical engineering clothed in the likeness of a human being. Though she appears lifelike and even gives the impression of possessing a personality, Horton admits that her intelligence is limited. She can only process basic, interchangeable programming, functioning through routines that can be replaced or rewritten. Beneath this, however, lies a more advanced system, a secondary, permanent internal drive that enables her to record experiences and store them as data. Memories, in a sense. Yet despite this remarkable feature, Cynthia cannot yet learn or evolve from those memories. This limitation, Horton explains, is what he most hopes to overcome, a challenge that defines the next phase of his work. As Horton and Stark continue their conversation, discussing the philosophical and technological implications of synthetic life, a crew begins to pack up the experiment. With great care, they secure the vacuum chamber containing Cynthia and load it onto a large cargo truck. Horton believes the truck will deliver his creation safely to his Brooklyn laboratory, where he intends to resume his work. But the journey takes an unexpected turn. After a series of wrong turns through the city, the truck arrives not at Horton's lab, but at the New York docks. There, under cover of night, the crate holding Cynthia Glass is transferred onto a cargo ship bound for Nazi Germany. In the days that follow, news of Horton's creation, the so-called Human Torch, sweeps across the nation and soon the globe. Newspapers hail the invention as a scientific miracle, but beneath the excitement, tension brews. The U.S. government, aware of the potential propaganda impact, anticipates that such reports will provoke a response from Germany, a challenge to Nazi scientific superiority. Yet what they failed to predict is the backlash at home. Across America, public outrage erupts. Protesters take to the streets, condemning Horton's creation. To them, the synthetic woman is not a triumph of human ingenuity, but an abomination, a lifeless imitation masquerading as one of them. Signs and headlines alike echo a single sentiment: monster. After years of relentless searching, Johann Schmidt finally secured the Tesseract and returned triumphantly to Hydra headquarters in Germany. There, he entrusted the artifact to Arnim Zola, his chief scientist, tasking him with unlocking its mysteries and using its boundless energy to expand Hydra's arsenal. Zola approached the assignment with both fascination and dread. Though he had studied countless sources and ancient accounts, his understanding of the Tesseract's true nature remained fragmentary at best. He feared the artifact's potential far exceeded the limits of his machines. Still, he prepared the Tesseract Cradle, a device designed to capture and contain the cube's energy, though even he doubted it could withstand the strain. Once the laboratory was ready, Schmidt carefully retrieved the Tesseract from its protective container, the same vessel discovered years earlier in Tonsberg, Norway, and placed it within Zola's machinery. The scientists activated the system, and the experiment began. Zola, ever cautious, incrementally increased the pressure, watching the readings climb as he stabilized the device at 70% capacity. The machine hummed with power, its energy arcs flickering dangerously across the room. But Schmidt, consumed by ambition and unwilling to settle for restraint, dismissed Zola's hesitation. Declaring caution a weakness, he seized control of the console, ignoring his scientist's protests, and pushed the machine beyond its safety limits. Instantly, the laboratory was engulfed in a blinding surge of light. Consoles exploded, glass shattered, and the cradle trembled violently before finally collapsing under the immense strain. When the energy finally subsided, Schmidt and Zola found themselves staring at the wreckage, believing the device had been destroyed by the Tesseract's overwhelming power. Then Zola made a startling discovery. Within the ruins, the cube cartridge, the containment vessel attached to the cradle, had succeeded in capturing a fragment of the Tesseract's energy. That single fraction radiated enough power to energize the entire Hydra facility and beyond. Zola quickly realized what this meant. If even this small portion could generate such output, Hydra could harness it to create weapons powerful enough to turn the tide of World War II, granting the Nazis certain victory over the United States and the Allies. But Schmidt's vision extended further. He saw in the Tesseract not just a tool of war, but the key to dominion itself. With this power, Hydra no longer needed to serve Hitler's ambitions. They could surpass them. At that moment, Schmidt understood that Hydra would rise above the Reich, and he, the Red Skull, would become ruler of a new world order. At a lively bar near Camp Lehigh, Steve Rogers and his Howling Commandos celebrated another victory. The atmosphere was warm and rowdy, filled with laughter, teasing, and the clinking of glasses. Amidst the noise, Steve found himself sitting beside James Howlett, who quietly drank alone at the edge of the table. The two men struck up a conversation, and as the night wore on, a sense of mutual respect grew between them. Curious, Howlett asked Steve about his life before becoming Captain America. Steve spoke openly. He told him about growing up in Brooklyn during the Great Depression, a frail young man with more determination than strength. His father had died when he was a child, and his mother, Sarah Rogers, later succumbed to pneumonia when he was in his late teens. Steve recalled her final words, that a strong heart would take him farther than any physical strength ever could, and that a strong heart meant never giving up. After her death, Steve moved in with Bucky Barnes, working as a delivery boy to get by. Life was difficult. Sickly and undersized, he was often the target of bullies, but Bucky was always there, his protector, his brother, standing beside him to the end of the line. Despite his hardships, Steve found joy in drawing, his creative outlet, and an escape from the harshness of daily life. He also loved going to the movies, losing himself in stories of heroes and adventure. Then came 1942. The newsreels showing the Nazi invasion of Europe horrified him. That moment solidified his resolve. He would find a way to serve, to stand against tyranny, no matter the odds. Howlett listened intently, captivated by Steve's story. When Steve turned the question back on him, asking about his own past, Howlett said only that it was complicated. Then, without another word, his bone claws extended slowly from his hands. Steve asked if it hurt. Howlett simply replied, "Every time." After a while, they began to talk, not about victory or medals, but about the things they couldn't forget, the ruins they'd left behind, the faces that lingered after battle, the buildings they'd raided, the soldiers they'd fought, how each mission blurred into the next, until all that remained were memories of smoke, screams, and loss. For both men, war had carved away everything soft, leaving only what was necessary to survive. Yet in that shared acknowledgement of horror, something else had taken root, a bond. They bled beside one another, carried each other through chaos, and witnessed things no human being should. Before the conversation could go further, Bucky, clearly drunk, stumbled over, announcing that he'd brought some women who were waiting to join them. Howlett rose to meet them, amused, but Steve politely declined the invitation. He smiled, saying he'd rather wait for the right partner, someone worth waiting for. In Germany, chaos erupted when Cynthia Glass, the so-called Human Torch, suddenly ignited in flames as she broke free from the truck that had transported her. The fire consumed her body instantly, her synthetic skin glowing with unbearable heat, and the flames spread uncontrollably to everything around her. The streets filled with panic as onlookers fled from the inferno. Unable to control the fire, Cynthia screamed for everyone to stay away before launching herself skyward, blazing through the clouds and vanishing into the horizon. Before long, she was captured by Red Skull, and Phineas Horton's synthetic woman was reprogrammed into a weapon of destruction for Hydra. Inside the Hydra headquarters, Nazi officers gathered under Adolf Hitler's orders, discussing the recent destruction of what they believed to be a secret missile base in the Pacific. As the meeting unfolded, Johann Schmidt, the Red Skull himself, stood silently, his fury building as he listened. The reports revealed that the base had been obliterated, not by Allied forces, but by Atlanteans led by Namor. When the meeting concluded, Schmidt left the room flanked by 3 Nazi officers. As they walked, he reminded them that years earlier, Hitler had commanded the eradication of the Underwater Kingdom, a mission that would have succeeded if not for Namor's intervention. The officers, following Hitler's directives, pressed Schmidt about the progress of his advanced weapons program for the Third Reich. Calmly, Schmidt offered to show them firsthand. He led them through the vast corridors of Hydra's facility, a fortress powered by the Tesseract. As they toured the laboratories, one officer muttered that Hitler was displeased with Schmidt's conduct, calling his position within Hydra a mere reward for the deformity he suffered from taking the super soldier serum. Schmidt dismissed the remark, viewing his post not as a gift, but as exile. Their tour ended in Schmidt's main laboratory, a sprawling chamber filled with weapons energized by the Tesseract's cosmic power. At its center stood Cynthia, encased in containment restraints, glowing faintly blue from the cube's energy. With a cold satisfaction, Schmidt unveiled her to the officers, announcing that this was Hydra's future. Then, without hesitation, he ordered Cynthia to eliminate them. As the officers fell, consumed by fire, Schmidt fully severed his ties to Hitler and the Nazi cause. Hydra, he declared, would no longer live in Hitler's shadow. From now on, they would rise as a power greater than any nation. A new world order born of the Tesseract's might. Johann Schmidt grows obsessed with proving himself the future of the Reich. His cruelty intensifies. Executions for failure, experiments for efficiency. Weakness repulses him. Mercy disgusts him. He does not merely serve Nazism. He embodies its fanaticism. The Hydra soldiers around him raised their arms and shouted in unison, "Hail, Hydra!" The sound echoed through the halls like thunder. Watching the carnage unfold, Arnim Zola stood in silent horror. Yet, even as his stomach turned, he remained loyal, offering a trembling salute to his master. Several days later, Steve Rogers took part in promotional work as Captain America, speaking to groups of children about courage, duty, and what it meant to serve one's country. It was meant to be inspiring, a symbol of hope for the home front. But beneath the cheers and patriotic songs, Steve felt the weight of the war pressing down on him. After the event, grim news reached him. Sergeant Jack Fury and several members of the Howling Commandos had been captured by Hydra during a covert operation. Without hesitation, Steve prepared to go after them. Howard visits him. He brings news of something troubling. Phineas Horton's research, dangerous, groundbreaking, and not meant for the wrong hands, has disappeared. There is uncertainty, but also an edge of fear beneath Howard's calm. He does not need to spell out the possibility that Hydra might have seized it. Steve absorbs this with the same gravity he carries for his missing friends. His sense of duty expands, not as a burden, but as a conviction. Rescue his team. Prevent Hydra from advancing into something even darker. He gives Howard the reassurance not of certainty, but of intent. He will recover the research if he can, because he knows what happens if he doesn't. He will not allow Hydra to push further toward a world defined by cruelty and domination. Howard Stark, ever loyal to the cause, volunteered his assistance and flew Steve toward France, deep into enemy territory, 30 miles behind enemy lines. As they neared the drop point, the plane came under heavy fire from Hydra anti-aircraft guns. The night sky flashed with tracer fire as rounds tore through the air. Acting without hesitation, Steve leapt from the aircraft mid-flight, deploying his chute and landing safely in a darkened field below, determined to finish the mission. Making his way through the French countryside, Steve eventually reached a small village, or what was left of it. The place had been completely incinerated, reduced to smoldering ruins. Moving carefully through the devastation, Steve's steps slowed as he took in the eerie silence. Among the ashes, he saw two figures locked together, at first appearing to have died in an embrace. But as he drew closer, he realized the truth. They had died strangling each other. The horror deepened as he continued through the wreckage. Everywhere he looked, there were more bodies, twisted and contorted, victims who had turned on one another before being consumed by fire. The village was silent now, but the air still carried the weight of madness and violence. Something terrible had happened here, something beyond the reach of ordinary war. With Hydra now fully self-funded and no longer reliant on Nazi resources, Johann Schmidt toured his expansive weapons facility in France, where prisoners of war toiled endlessly to construct a new generation of Tesseract-powered weaponry. The air inside the compound was filled with the sounds of machinery, the rhythmic pounding of metal, and the labored breaths of men driven far beyond their limits. As Schmidt made his way through the facility, Arnim Zola approached with an update. All operations, including the production of the Valkyrie, Hydra's massive bomber, were proceeding precisely on schedule. The progress was impressive, Zola noted, even by their own demanding standards. But Schmidt was not satisfied. Coldly, he ordered that the workload be increased exponentially, demanding faster results regardless of a human cost. Zola hesitated, voicing concern that such an increase would surely kill the prisoners, who were already at the brink of exhaustion. Yet Schmidt dismissed the warning without pause. The lives of the workers meant nothing to him. He made it clear that if these men perished, Hydra would simply find more to replace them. To Schmidt, the facility was not a factory. It was an engine of domination. And every life it consumed brought him one step closer to his vision of a world remade under Hydra's rule. Steve Rogers rendezvoused with the Free French Resistance at a hidden encampment nestled deep within the ruined outskirts of occupied France. The small group of weary soldiers, hardened by years of guerrilla warfare, had gathered around makeshift maps and intercepted Hydra documents. From them, Steve learned the truth behind the devastation he'd witnessed in the nearby village. It wasn't the work of conventional weaponry, but of something far worse. The Resistance described a creature of fire, a woman engulfed in flames who had reduced everything around her to ash. They called her the Human Torch, a creation that followed Johann Schmidt, the man known to them only as the Red Skull. Her path of destruction had trailed Hydra's movements across France, and wherever she appeared, no life survived. Steve had never heard of Red Skull or his fiery companion before, but he knew instantly that they represented something far beyond the war as he understood it. He could not allow them to continue. As he studied the Resistance's crude maps, Steve began to formulate a plan, a strategy to track Hydra's convoy and intercept them before they could deploy whatever weapon they were moving toward the front. But before the meeting could end, one of the Resistance leaders shared one final piece of intelligence. A rumor whispered among soldiers and fishermen alike. They weren't the only ones pursuing the Red Skull. Somewhere in the vast waters off the French coast, there was an ally from the sea, a man of unearthly strength and wrath, a being who could breathe beneath the waves and take to the skies with equal ease. He was said to strike without warning, rising from the depths to destroy Hydra's strongholds before vanishing again into the ocean. The Resistance had never seen him up close, but they knew his name was feared by Hydra soldiers who spoke of him only in whispers, the Submariner. They did not know when he would appear, but they believed his fury would soon find Red Skull. With this knowledge, Captain America and the Free French Resistance assembled a battalion of Allied troops, uniting under one purpose: to hunt down the Hydra fortress. With the help of intelligence provided by the Free French Resistance, Steve Rogers and a contingent of Allied soldiers successfully infiltrated a heavily fortified Hydra stronghold commanded by Johann Schmidt. Moving under the cover of darkness, they slipped through patrol routes and security checkpoints, navigating the labyrinthine corridors of the fortress with precision and restraint. Every footstep carried the weight of risk. Detection would mean annihilation. Inside the compound, Steve discovered a piece of advanced technology, a glowing apparatus that pulsed with an otherworldly blue energy unlike anything he had seen before. Recognizing its potential significance, he confiscated the device, intending to deliver it to Howard Stark for study. Steve hoped Stark might uncover the secret behind Hydra's sudden surge in technological power, perhaps even trace its origin. But their covert mission soon erupted into chaos. The Allied troops freed scores of prisoners of war, and the fortress transformed into a battlefield as the liberated men joined the assault against Hydra's army. Explosions tore through the facility, gunfire echoed in the halls, and Hydra's soldiers fell in droves under the combined might of the rebellion. Watching the chaos unfold from his command chamber, Schmidt quickly realized the tide had turned. His forces were collapsing, his fortress falling apart from within. Without hesitation, he initiated the self-destruct sequence, sealing the fate of the installation. Arnim Zola, caught off guard, pleaded for restraint. His research represented years of experimentation and progress. But Schmidt merely gestured toward the surveillance monitors, where Captain America fought his way through Hydra's defenses. To Schmidt, the decision was clear. Their enemy had outmatched them. Their creation, the Tesseract, was all that mattered now. As alarms blared and the countdown began, Zola frantically gathered his research, clutching papers and data reels as if his life depended on them, while Schmidt calmly retrieved the Tesseract, its glow reflecting off his expressionless visage as the fortress began to collapse around them. Steve Rogers and the Allied troops stormed deeper into the Hydra fortress, eventually locating Jack Fury and the Howling Commandos, bound and restrained within one of the holding cells. The soldiers swiftly freed them, and Jack, overcome with relief and gratitude, praised Steve for saving his life. Bucky Barnes and the others were equally elated to see him alive, their morale instantly lifted by the sight of their old comrade in arms. Without wasting time, Steve ordered the commandos and the Allied troops to evacuate, insisting they get clear of the facility before it collapsed. He would stay behind to find Johann Schmidt. At the top of the fortress, Steve encountered Schmidt, attempting to flee alongside Arnim Zola. The Red Skull regarded him with cold fascination, openly expressing his satisfaction at finally meeting the famed Captain America in person. He referenced Steve's victorious campaign in the Philippines and noted that Dr. Abraham Erskine's Project Rebirth had clearly succeeded beyond expectation. Yet, with cruel arrogance, Schmidt remarked that while Steve was indeed remarkable, he was far from a true improvement, merely a shadow of what Hydra sought to perfect. Unwilling to listen to another word, Steve lunged at Schmidt, determined to bring him down and end Hydra's reign. The two clashed violently, their blows shattering glass, denting steel, and echoing through the inferno around them. Schmidt's enhanced strength overwhelmed even Steve's resilience. Each strike from the Red Skull was merciless, leaving Steve bloodied and battered. Before Schmidt could finish him, the ceiling above them suddenly collapsed in a deafening explosion. A Hydra tank came crashing through, smashing into the floor and erupting into fire. From the smoke and debris emerged Namor, the Submariner, his eyes blazing with fury. Consumed by rage, Namor tore through the remaining Hydra troops, ripping through them with superhuman ferocity and precision. Bodies fell in his wake as he moved like a force of nature, unstoppable and vengeful. Then, amid the chaos, his gaze locked onto Red Skull. Recognizing the man responsible for so much destruction, Namor's fury intensified. With unyielding resolve, he launched himself toward Schmidt, his wings flaring, shouting his thunderous battle cry for the first time, Imperious Rex. Schmidt fled and swiftly pulled a small device from his pocket, pressing it to reactivate Cynthia, the Human Torch. As she reignited, several Hydra soldiers opened fire on the Submariner, their bullets bouncing harmlessly off his skin. Namor, unfazed and almost amused, retaliated by knocking them aside with his trident, each swing sending bodies flying. Schmidt soon found himself cornered, his escape route cut off. Namor advanced, eyes blazing with vengeance. At last, his moment had come. He seized Schmidt by the throat, lifting him effortlessly off the ground. As Namor's grip tightened, the air shimmered with heat. Then suddenly, a flaming hand clamped down on Namor's arm. The flame spread, forcing Namor to release Schmidt. He turned, a flicker of fear and disbelief crossing his face as he came face to face with the Human Torch. Cynthia, fully engulfed in roaring fire, her power burning brighter than ever. The two titans clashed violently, android and Atlantean, strength against fury. They battled and chased each other through the air, weaving between explosions and wreckage, until Namor burst skyward, wreathed in flames, disappearing into the smoke-filled sky. Meanwhile, Schmidt and Cynthia descended toward the battlefield below, intent on ending the chaos once and for all. From his vantage point, Bucky Barnes spotted the flaming woman engaged with Steve, and at the same time, saw Schmidt fleeing with Zola in the opposite direction. Realizing this was their only chance to end the war, Bucky took aim. He squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck Cynthia instead, ricocheting harmlessly off her flaming skull, as Schmidt and Zola escaped into the distance. The Human Torch's head snapped toward Bucky's position, her fiery gaze locking onto him, just before Captain America's shield slammed into her, knocking her unconscious. The Human Torch was down, but the true enemy, the Red Skull, had slipped away once again. At one of the Free French resistance compounds, inside a dimly lit tent, Jack Fury, James Howlett, Dum Dugan, Gabe Jones, and several others gather around a table where the motionless body of the Human Torch lies. The men, still processing what they've witnessed, cautiously poke and prod at the synthetic woman's form, marveling at her strange construction and lifelike detail. Then, from behind them, a familiar voice breaks the tension. Howard Stark strides in, his sharp tone cutting through the murmurs. At his side is Professor Phineas Horton, his face pale and hollow, the weight of guilt etched into every line. Seeing his creation turned into a weapon fills him with shame. As Stark and Horton begin examining the android's burned components, Horton's trembling hands betray his horror at what his life's work has become. Outside, Steve Rogers and Bucky take a quiet walk along the coastline, the wind carrying the faint echo of distant gunfire. The sea glistens with the light of the setting sun, though Steve's expression remains troubled. He confides in Bucky, speaking of his growing unease with how the Tesseract's power is being harnessed for destruction, a force too vast, too unpredictable, to ever belong in human hands. Their conversation halts when Bucky suddenly stops, sensing movement nearby. In one fluid motion, he draws a knife and hurls it toward the sound. The blade strikes true, but instead of piercing flesh, it clangs harmlessly off of a man's chest. Emerging from the mist and surf stands Namor, his presence commanding, his tone dripping with arrogance. He speaks with majestic disdain, chastising them for trespassing and for humanity's arrogance in tampering with forces they barely comprehend. He insults both Steve and Bucky, his words sharpened with eloquent venom, though he spares Steve a few backhanded compliments, calling him a soldier with conviction, rare among surface dwellers, still a fool bound by mortal ideals. With imperious pride, he introduces himself. Namor, son of a sea captain and Princess Fen of Atlantis, rightful heir to a kingdom that once thrived beneath the waves. His voice softens only briefly as he recalls how Hydra's actions and Nazi bombardments destroyed parts of his kingdom, killing those he loved most. His rage toward Hydra burns deeper than any ocean trench, and he vows vengeance upon them and all who threaten the seas. Steve and Bucky exchange a silent glance. Though the submariner's arrogance is grating, they recognize the pain beneath his pride. In that fleeting moment, they share a quiet understanding, soldiers bound by loss, fighting their own wars against tyranny. The trio returns to camp, where they discover that while the android Cynthia has been successfully reprogrammed, her memories remain intact. For the first time, she expresses something entirely new, a desire, the wish to atone for the horrors she has caused. Around her, the howling commandos eye the android warily. When Namor steps into view, their unease deepens. The soldiers immediately raise their weapons, questioning who this strange, regal man is and whether he can be trusted. Before tensions escalate, Steve orders them to stand down, urging calm. Namor declares that he wants to help them stop Hydra, his tone filled with conviction. After a tense pause, Jack Fury reluctantly agrees, though his suspicion remains. Later that night, in the command tent, Howard Stark closely studies a piece of Tesseract technology that Steve recovered from Hydra's fortress. He examines its power signatures and intricate design, hoping to understand how Hydra has managed to weaponize the artifact. Meanwhile, in a quieter part of camp, Steve sits alone with Cynthia. She appears troubled, her synthetic face carrying a haunting sadness. She confides in him, struggling to understand what she truly is, not human, not entirely machine, and laments that everyone who sees her views her as something dangerous and unnatural. She recalls how, each time she lost control and unleashed destruction, she felt ashamed and terrified of her own existence. To her, she is nothing more than a mistake, a creation that never should have existed. Steve listens, his expression softening. He assures her that none of it was her fault. He tells her that what defines a person, even one made of metal and fire, isn't how they were made, but the choices they make afterward. He encourages her to live by human morals, to use her strength to protect others and fight injustice, explaining that doing good will help her feel more human than she realizes. Yet Cynthia admits she will always be aware that others see her as just a machine. Steve, however, insists she must believe that things can change, that she can change. As he stands, his resolve hardens. He tells her that their focus now must be on stopping Schmidt and destroying Hydra. Cynthia looks up at him and gently reminds him that he will not be alone in this fight. The two share a quiet, reassuring smile. Red Skull has all of the Tesseract-powered energy bombs loaded aboard his colossal rocket, the Valkyrie, ready to be launched in a devastating strike against the United States of America. With every detail of his plan finally in place, he gathers his Hydra soldiers for one last address. Standing before them, he delivers a fiery speech, proclaiming that Hydra will soon stand triumphant over the world. As he raises his cup and roars the Hydra motto, his soldiers respond in perfect unison, saluting him with absolute loyalty. Red Skull looks upon them with grim satisfaction, convinced that nothing can stop him now. Meanwhile, across the front lines, Charles de Gaulle of the Free French Resistance delivers urgent intelligence from an intercepted Hydra transmission, confirmation that an imminent attack on the United States is about to occur. The threat is unlike anything seen before. Steve Rogers attends a strategic briefing led by Jack Fury, where they analyze Hydra's movements and discuss Red Skull's terrifying plan to use Tesseract technology as the key to global domination. Together, they formulate a desperate countermeasure to stop Hydra and bring Red Skull to justice once and for all. As the men prepare for what could be their final stand, Captain America, Bucky Barnes, James Howlett, Namor, and the Human Torch rally the troops. Standing shoulder to shoulder, they unite under a single banner. The Invaders are born. With no time to waste, the Strategic Scientific Reserve executes Steve's plan. Mounted on his specially modified motorcycle, upgraded with cutting-edge weaponry courtesy of Howard Stark, Captain America races across the battlefield alone toward the Hydra headquarters. As he approaches, a squadron of Hydra soldiers on motorcycles gives chase, surrounding him on all sides and opening fire. Without hesitation, Steve leaps from his speeding bike, sending it crashing into the fortress wall. The impact triggers a massive explosion, blasting open a gaping hole in the outer perimeter. Charging through the flames, Captain America storms the base. With his vibranium shield as both sword and shield, he cuts through the Hydra ranks, hurling men across the battlefield, deflecting gunfire, and striking with precision and power. Outmatched and overwhelmed in the fierce battle, Steve Rogers is captured and brought before Johann Schmidt in the heart of the Hydra headquarters. Inside his lavish yet menacing quarters, Red Skull studies his prisoner with contempt, remarking on Steve's reckless arrogance for launching an assault on Hydra's stronghold without any backup. He taunts him, questioning whether Abraham Erskine had ever warned him that even enhanced men had limits. He retorts that Erskine was a jealous fool, one who envied his brilliance and sought to deny him the power that should have been his. Schmidt views himself as the apex of Aryan ascendants, chosen by destiny. Steve sees only a coward hiding behind cruelty. The conversation turns bitter as Schmidt sneers that Steve was given his gifts freely, while he was forced to suffer for them. Then, with calculated malice, Schmidt demands to know why Erskine chose Steve, a nobody from Brooklyn, to carry the torch of his life's work. Steve answers simply, without hesitation. He wasn't special, just a kid from Brooklyn. The humility in those words ignites Schmidt's fury. With a roar, he strikes Steve hard across the face, sending him crashing to the floor. For a moment, silence fills the room as Schmidt regains his composure. Then, with cold finality, he draws his weapon and raises it towards Steve's head. Before he can fire, the walls erupt in chaos. The invaders burst through, descending upon Hydra with devastating force. Bucky fires precise cover shots. Howlett tears through soldiers with feral strength. Namor surges forward like a tidal wave of vengeance, and the Human Torch ignites the chamber in a storm of flame and light. At that moment, the tide turns. Captain America rises once more, rallying his team as they fight in unison. As the invaders continue their fierce battle against the Hydra soldiers, Johann Schmidt takes aim at Steve Rogers and fires. The shot would have struck true if not for Cynthia, who hurls Steve's shield to him at the last moment. The shield locks perfectly into his grasp, allowing Steve to deflect the blast just in time. Determined not to let Schmidt escape, Steve and Bucky sprint after him through the burning corridors of the Hydra stronghold. They eventually catch sight of Schmidt climbing aboard a massive rocket with his parachute as it prepares for launch. Steve orders Bucky to stay behind, but Bucky refuses to abandon him. Without hesitation, both men climb onto the rocket as it roars into the sky, cutting through the clouds at incredible speed. Clinging to the rocket's metallic surface, Captain America and Bucky Barnes engage Red Skull in a desperate mid-air struggle. The battle rages amid roaring engines and searing heat. The fight reaches its climax when a blast of smoke blinds Schmidt, causing him to lose his footing. In the chaos, the Tesseract powering the rocket dislodges from its containment chamber, its energy sputtering and dimming. Schmidt, horrified that his greatest prize is damaged, seizes the Tesseract with trembling hands. In an instant, a portal tears open through space itself, its blinding blue light consuming everything around it. The Red Skull vanishes into the void, pulled through to a mysterious dimension beyond comprehension. Steve and Bucky watch in shock as the Tesseract slips from the rocket, tumbling into the ocean below. With the artifact gone, the rocket begins to destabilize, its engines overloading. Someone must stop it before it detonates. Steve prepares to sacrifice himself, ready to steer the rocket away from populated areas. But Bucky makes his choice first. Believing the world needs Captain America more than it needs him, he strikes Steve, knocking him free from the rocket. Steve plummets through the freezing air, his final sight the explosion that consumes Bucky above. As he falls toward the icy waters of the North Atlantic, Steve shouts Bucky's name in anguish before disappearing beneath the waves, his body slowly freezing in suspended animation, his sacrifice marking the end of an era. Captain America and Bucky Barnes were mourned across the nation. Heroes who had risen from the bright lights of the USO stage to the front lines of war, only to fall in what many believed was their final act of sacrifice. Their supposed deaths in the rocket explosion sent waves of grief through America and the Allied forces alike. Even Jack Fury and the Howling Commandos, hardened by countless battles, bowed their heads in mourning for their fallen brothers in arms. In the months that followed, the world continued to heal. In New York City, Cynthia Glass, now free from Hydra's control, began using her powers to serve humanity. She became a quiet symbol of hope, melting through debris to rescue survivors during bombings, stopping criminals in their tracks, and saving civilians trapped in burning buildings. Her flames, once feared, now burned as a beacon of redemption. As the war pressed on, James Howlett, Cynthia, and Namor stood in the White House, summoned for a meeting of grave importance. A formal memorandum, delivered directly from President Franklin D. Roosevelt, awaited them. It outlined the next great Allied offensive, Operation Overlord, tentatively scheduled for May 1st. The trio stood together, no longer just survivors of war, but key figures in shaping its decisive end. In a quiet laboratory hidden from the world, the hum of machines and the glow of sterile light frame a meeting between intellect and ambition. Nathaniel Essex studies the blood of Namor, a being not entirely man, not entirely God, and in it he recognizes the proof of his life's obsession. Evolution has taken a leap forward. To him, this discovery is not an anomaly, but confirmation of everything he has believed. Humanity, he realizes, is on the verge of something greater, and he intends to guide it, no matter the cost. Howard Stark's presence in the room represents a different kind of vision. Where Nathaniel sees destiny, Howard sees danger and potential in equal measure. He wants results, answers that can be applied, controlled, weaponized if necessary. Nathaniel, however, interprets the blood not as a resource, but as revelation. To him, Namor's biology is sacred, a sign that nature has begun reshaping the human race without permission or oversight. As Nathaniel turns his attention to the blood of Steve Rogers, the meaning shifts. Steve embodies humanity's attempt to improve itself through science. Deliberate, mechanical, guided. Yet even that triumph, Nathaniel senses, is imperfect. The serum created strength, but not permanence. It manufactured a miracle, but not a new species. He begins to imagine a future in which the body itself evolves into an indestructible vessel. The next stage of life, where man and machine, nature and design, fuse into something eternal. Howard's unease grows as Nathaniel's fixation deepens. Where one sees innovation, the other sees ascension. What Howard considers a scientific frontier, Nathaniel regards as the inevitable evolution of mankind, a transformation that cannot and should not be contained.